What's up? This is Dominique Beaumonte, and you are listening to Season with Salt, the podcast. I once had this really wild job, and to protect the identity of some of the people, I'm going to change the names and experiences. But it was for a university that I worked with. And I had a white woman supervisor, a Caucasian woman, and she was a person that was a high-ranking academic professional, let's say. And the irony was she had a black assistant. This black assistant, let's say she was a 65-year-old lady. She was a little older. And in the beginning, it was a cool relationship. Me and the white woman superior and the African American assistant that she had. The African American assistant that she had was like her executive assistant, let's say. And this woman was very kind to me. She was very auntie-like in the beginning. And she would tell me things, she kind of named some of the things that I should know. She would put me up on game on things that she knew was coming down the pike. Like she was that kind of person. Very down to earth, very kind, very much gonna look out for her people. Everything was going well until this woman decided to retire. She said to me, I knew that woman was trying to harm you. And I knew all the things that she was doing, and I knew who she was using to get information about you. And every day, especially my last day, I wish I would have done something. I wish I would have wrote an anonymous note. I wish I would have said something. I wish I would have went to HR. I wish I would have reported something. She's confiding all this in me, and a part of me is thinking, wow, like this is really cool that like somebody affirms the fact that I have been mistreated and harmed in that professional situation. And then I leave this lunch and I'm walking back, and it hits me that even though she had the best of intention, it's people like her that make things like this a thing. Because even though she knew some of the harmful, incredibly harmful things that this woman was doing towards me, she never, ever, ever lifted her voice. She never, ever was willing to take a risk to say, this is not right. And I understand the position that she was in, and I can empathize with it to an extent, right? No matter, you have a system where everybody is just trying to survive and trying to do their best to come to work, get paid, and leave without any conflict. The risk that she would have created by saying something on my behalf would have created even more drama, and also would have put her in danger. Even though she was on her way out and she potentially could not have cared, it reminded me, and I just never, ever, ever forgot how it felt when I walked back from that lunch back to the office, knowing that right in front of me, somebody knew my plight. Somebody knew the attack that was being waged against me. They had documentation. They were, even to an extent, a part of that attack, a part of the execution of that attack. And they didn't do anything, but they wanted me to affirm the fact that they would have if they thought that they could have. And I just remember that being really depressing. And I never really realized why I had that experience until years later when I was in the position to affirm, defend somebody else. And what comes to mind, and I think this is important for folks that want to be disruptive professionally, it's important to take into consideration what you allow people to do to other people. Not even people you like. You don't have to like them. But 9 times out of 10, if they will do it to somebody else in your company, they will do it to you eventually. As time goes on, you will become the same, or you will become the victim to the same kind of thing that you watched them victimize somebody else. Now, luckily for this woman, she was able to remove herself from this tragic community before she became public enemy like some of the other people. A lot of the people later on through life would reconnect with me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. They find me and tell me, hey, I survived that, or I don't know how I did it, or I don't know how you did it. And I'd always think like, people don't think about being brave at work because we're so connected to this idea of survival that standing for something, having the type of integrity that pushes you to say something when the system would push you to be silent is like this wild and unheard of thing, right? I'm reading I'm reading the definition of disruptive. And I know that uh, there has been commentary throughout the years about ways to be destructive. I know but the conversations that we've had as a community about making good trouble. But I love this definition of disruptive that I found just by Googling it, right? And so I'm not taking credit for this definition at all. I Googled it and I actually looked for one that I thought aligned with what I wanted to share. Here's the definition that I found: disruptive, causing radical change in an existing industry or market, breaking through, being innovative. And I thought that that was interesting. Radical change through innovation. So, in other words, finding creative ways to make change that impacts the entire system and that helps people. This definition like really stuck with me because I don't think that we illuminate or bring to the surface enough this personality trait, this professional trait of being disruptive. Because I think in our minds, we attach a lot of negative connotation, if you will, to being disruptive. Disruptive has to mean that you're aggressively willing to challenge the status quo in a negative way. But I thought about this idea of making change from a more strategic and creative way, right? And I did some assessment over my own career, like opportunities that I've had, whether it be as a leader, as a follower, as a supporter, as a C-suite leader, as a director, as a mid-level person, I thought about all the opportunities that have been presented to me to advocate for other people. I'm in the state of Washington during this workshop, and I'm talking to folks about how to make people feel more welcome in communities that we're in. And one of the women in the meeting raises her hand and says, I hear what you're saying. It sounds good. It sounds ideal. It just sounds like something that makes sense, but I question whether it's attainable. And for a minute, I was kind of stumped because she gave a very specific example of something that she was struggling with. And I wonder within myself, like, what actually would I do if I was in that position and I was tasked with finding a solution for that issue that she was facing. In that moment, y'all, like I could hear myself like praying because I didn't want to give her bad advice, but I also wanted to be a good example of the thing that I was preaching about, right? I wanted people to know that it is possible to be disruptive in your work by being creative and thinking outside of the box. And in that moment, it was like God started giving me all these things that this person can do. Like, you can do this, you can say this, you can try this, you can evaluate these power structures, you can call this person, you can use your influence and your privilege in multiple directions. And I started asking her, have you considered doing this? Like, have you thought about the impact that you can make if you did this? And I realized that a lot of times our problem and the reason why we're unable to be disruptive is because we think there's one way to be disruptive, right? You got to be at the meeting loud and disrespectful and hollering and making just noise. And one of the things that God revealed to me in this moment when I'm talking to this woman is that a disruptive person might not always do the disrupting in the meeting. A disruptive person might not necessarily do the disrupting in an email. A disruptive person might use their power and their influence to disrupt a situation through their influence on policy, right? I had a situation, and I don't want to overshare because it's not my business. But I'm also called to other people's business. I think I have to make a episode about that. God has called me to other people's business, and not as a person that's nosy or a rebel rouser, but God calls us to other people's business because He calls us to be creatively engaged in helping other people find solutions for the issues and the challenges that they have. That's why I have a podcast. That's why I'm a preacher. God has called me to other people's business. And in a situation that I was in, like somebody that I love and respect, a group of people that I love and respect, they're having this issue in an academic setting with their child, let's say. And I knew what my first inclination was. My first inclination was to get in my car and go disrupt some stuff in space. I'm gonna like holler at the principal, I'm gonna say XYZ, I'm gonna make a big scene in order to get what it is that I need. And I just thought that that was the only way, right? What I realized in the process, because I had to start praying and asking God to remove me, like help me to go on the balcony and look down and figure out what the best way to do things are. The more that I thought about the situation that I was in or the situation I was faced with that somebody else was in, the more I realized that I could be most valuable to that situation by stepping back and doing some creative thinking. And the first thing that came to me is, who do I know? Who do I know? Because sometimes the reason why we're not effective in being disruptive on behalf of other people is because we always sometimes first think about who we can be right? How can we show up to defend this person? How can we how can our skill set, our professional acumen, like who we like our degree, what school we went to, what we know, how can we use that to save or to be there for somebody? And so I'm thinking about all those kinds of things and realize that it doesn't have to be me, right? Oh my gosh, it doesn't have to be me. So I start thinking, who do I know? Because it doesn't have to be me. Who do I know? I realized that I know some high ranking people in this particular community. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So I start texting them, hey, I got a scenario. I want to talk to you about it in confidence because it's not my issue, it's somebody else's. But I want to see what you think about it. And then after you get your opinion or your position, then um, I want to be able to help this group of people. So I'm like, okay, who do I know? I start texting people. These are the people that I know. Great. Then things were still for a moment. Like there were no responses. There was no outcomes that I was looking for. I hadn't heard from people. So I went back to this place of like, who can I be? Like who I start calling myself. I started doing stuff and I remembered, okay, this you might not it might not be your voice, right? Like you might not be able you might not have a seat at the table, but you still have the capacity, the ability to make impact and be innovative and think forward in this situation for the sake of other people. So, who do I know? Eliminating myself again, I pull myself back and I start thinking there's got to be some policies that I need to read. So I start reading all the policies and I start figuring out, oh, there are other people that can be called. And then at the end, what I realized is that the help that I was able to provide that particular person all centered in me taking who I knew and what I was able to read and gather and writing those things down and saying, hey, I want to empower you with these words. And then I want you to know that I'm here for you. And it was a little bit hard because I was ready to get it crunk. I was ready to get rowdy because I thought that that's what was necessary. And what God really was teaching me is that you can have the same or even more impact and influence by being innovative, right? You don't have to be loud. You can be quiet and you can make impact. So, end of the day, the way that God ended up fixing that scenario was not necessarily the way that I imagined or envisioned that the scenario would be fixed, but I watched God help me and help the other person be as disruptive as possible and not lose our religion, not lose our identity, not lose our cool, not lose our any relationships or lose trust in one another because of our inability to manage our emotions. Like nobody lost anything. And I think it's an important lesson for us to learn because if we don't learn how to creatively advance the cause of other people, if we don't learn how to stand up for people, even if that standing up is not loud and bodacious, then we end up becoming a person that we're not proud of. And we call we call the people that we could have advocated for, but we didn't. And we have lunch with them afterwards, and we reel off all the things that we wish we would have done. And so there are probably some people you can still advocate for if you think about it. There are probably some scenarios where you passively allow something to happen, and over time, you think that it just kind of fizzled away, but there's still an opportunity for you to actually go back and say something. Some of us need to apologize to people that we allowed to be harmed and we didn't say anything, period. And some of us need to go back to people and say, hey, what can I do? Some of us need to trust God enough to believe that nobody can take anything from us. Because a lot of times we're so invested in survival that we don't try to help people because we feel like if we help other people, we lose things for ourselves. And I think we got to challenge that. I think we have to have real conversations with people about how to, and I think it's as simple sometimes as asking people, how can I help you? I also learned that sometimes people don't know how they can be helped. You got to tell them, I think this is the way I want to help you. So that's where I stood. That's the lesson that I learned from this good intentioned woman about how to be a better intentioned person, right? And in my reflection, I am better. But also in this reflection, I have more to do. And I received that. And I'm watching who and how I stand up for people because that's important. Thank you for listening.
Season whistle, whistle. Season whistle, whistle.